The first text from my mother arrived at exactly 9:47 p.m. Mom, where are you? You're late. Everyone's waiting. Come to the Grand Oak immediately. I frowned at my phone. Late, I opened the message again, convinced I had misread it. My mother's 30th wedding anniversary was tonight, but I hadn't received an invitation. There had been no phone call, no family group message, no email, nothing. I had assumed they wanted a quiet celebration with close friends, just as they had done the year before. Still, something felt wrong. I called my mother immediately, no answer. I tried my father, straight to voicemail. Then my younger brother, Jake, he declined the call. A knot tightened in my stomach. Had someone gotten hurt? Was this some kind of emergency? Without wasting another second, I grabbed my car keys and drove across town toward the Grand Oak, the fanciest restaurant in the city. The entire drive, I replayed every possibility in my head. Maybe they had forgotten to send me the invitation. Maybe there had been a last-minute reservation change. Maybe this was all one giant misunderstanding. I wanted to believe that. 25 minutes later, I pulled into the restaurant parking lot. Luxury cars lined the entrance, and guests wearing elegant evening clothes were laughing as they walked outside. Some carried gift bags, others hugged my parents goodbye. The celebration was clearly over. I hurried inside anyway. Near the lobby stood my parents, Jake, my Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, and several cousins. Everyone looked relaxed. Everyone except me. There she is. Jake laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear. My mother folded her arms. Finally, she said coldly, "You're late." I stared at her in disbelief. Late. I asked, "Mom, I didn't even know there was a dinner until you texted me." She rolled her eyes dramatically. Excuses already. I never received an invitation. Several relatives exchanged awkward glances, but nobody said a word. Instead of answering, my mother reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a leather folder. She placed it directly into my hands. "The bill," she said, "cover it." I looked down, my heart nearly stopped. $4,862. 17. I blinked twice, certain I had misplaced the decimal point. $4,800 for one dinner. What is this? Our anniversary dinner. Mom replied casually, "You make the most money. It's only fair." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because my brain refused to believe what I was hearing. "You invited me after dinner ended. Just to pay." Dad finally spoke. "Don't make a scene." "A scene," I repeated. "I wasn't invited." Jake shrugged. "You would have complained if we asked earlier." "I've never complained about helping this family." "Exactly," he said with a smirk. "So what's the problem?" The words hit harder than I expected, because he was right. I had never complained. Not when I paid Jake's college tuition after he dropped out twice. Not when I covered Dad's overdue mortgage payment. Not when Mom's luxury SUV lease suddenly became a family emergency. Every time I convinced myself families helped each other. Tonight felt different. This wasn't help, this was a setup. I looked around the lobby. My aunt suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. My cousins avoided eye contact. Even the restaurant hostess looked uncomfortable. Everyone knew. Everyone had watched this happen. Mom sighed impatiently. "Emily, people are waiting." I glanced toward the front desk. The manager stood nearby, holding the payment machine, but carefully pretending not to listen. I slowly closed the leather folder. For the first time in years, I stopped feeling guilty. Instead, I felt something far more dangerous. Clarity. If my family had invited me only to use me as their personal credit card, then this dinner wasn't the beginning of my humiliation. It was the end of it. I looked back at my mother, who was already expecting me to hand over my card without another question. I smiled, not because I accepted what she'd done, but because, for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to keep playing the role they had written for me. And before the night was over, I silently promised myself one thing. If they wanted to treat me like an ATM, they were about to discover what happened when the machine permanently went out of service. I stood in the restaurant lobby with the leather bill folder still in my hands. The total glared back at me, $4,862. 17, while my family waited as though paying it was the most natural thing in the world. The silence felt heavier than the bill itself. My mother checked her watch dramatically. "Emily, we're tired." She sighed. "Can you stop making this difficult? Difficult." I whispered. "You didn't invite me. You called me after dinner was over." "So what?" Jake replied with a shrug. "You still would have paid if you'd been here." Several relatives chuckled softly. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. They weren't laughing because it was funny. They were laughing because they expected me to accept it. Just like I always had. As I stared at the receipt, memories came rushing back. When Jake decided to attend a private university, my parents claimed they couldn't afford the tuition. I had only been working for 2 years, saving every paycheck for the small house I dreamed of buying someday. Mom had cried over the phone, "We can't let your brother give up his future." Without hesitation, I emptied nearly all of my savings. Jake promised he'd pay me back. He never did. A few years later, Dad's construction business hit financial trouble. The bank threatened foreclosure on the family home. Again, everyone looked at me. "You're the successful one," Dad had said. I wrote another check, then came Mom's medical emergency. She insisted she needed financial help immediately. I transferred thousands of dollars without asking questions. Only weeks later did I discover the money had actually gone toward leasing a brand new luxury SUV because, according to her, people expect me to drive something respectable. I wanted to be angry. Instead, I convinced myself she deserved something nice. That was my biggest mistake. Every family birthday followed the same pattern. Jake chose expensive restaurants. Dad ordered premium steaks. Mom insisted everyone have dessert and wine. When the check arrived, all eyes turned toward me. Emily's got it. No one even asked anymore. It had become an unspoken tradition. My promotions at work barely received a congratulations. When I bought my first condo, nobody visited. When I worked 70-hour weeks to earn a senior management position, my parents called only to ask if I could help Jake out one more time. I wasn't their daughter. I was their emergency fund. Back in the restaurant, my Aunt Linda finally spoke. "Emily, your parents have done so much for you." I looked at her. "What exactly have they done?" She opened her mouth, then closed it because she couldn't answer. Dad stepped forward. "Don't embarrass us." I looked around the nearly empty restaurant. The embarrassment happened before I got here. Mom crossed her arms. "So you're refusing?" I took a long breath. "No." Their expressions instantly relaxed. Jake grinned. "I told you she'd pay." I ignored him. Instead, I walked calmly to the front desk. The restaurant manager greeted me politely. "I'm very sorry about the misunderstanding, ma'am. I have one request." I said, "I'll pay the bill." My family's smiles returned. "But first," I continued, eyed like an itemized invoice. The manager nodded, of course. A few minutes later, he handed me 6 printed pages. I examined every line carefully. 3 bottles of imported champagne, a vintage wine collection, premium seafood towers, gold label whiskey, private dining room fees, luxury desserts covered in edible gold leaf. I had never even tasted any of it. Yet somehow, I was expected to pay for every bite. Interesting, very interesting. I pulled out my credit card. The payment went through. My mother smiled triumphantly. "I knew you'd do the right thing." I smiled back. For the first time that evening, my smile was genuine. Not because I forgave them, because they had no idea what I had just purchased. It wasn't dinner, it was evidence, every charge, every signature, every timestamp. Every item on that invoice proved I had been deliberately excluded while being expected to finance their celebration. As my family walked out of the restaurant laughing together, they believed they had won once again. None of them noticed me quietly asking the manager one final question. Would it be possible to get a copy of the reservation details? The manager hesitated. "I'll need to check what's allowed." "That's fine," I replied calmly. "I have a feeling I'll be needing every record connected to tonight." Outside, my family drove away without thanking me. Not one hug, not one apology, not even a simple good night. I watched their taillights disappear into the darkness. For years, I had mistaken generosity for love. That illusion ended tonight. They thought they had emptied my bank account one more time. What they didn't realize was that they had finally filled something far more valuable, my determination, and before long, every secret they had hidden behind smiling family photos was about to come into the light. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I didn't wake up angry. I woke up focused. For years, I had reacted emotionally whenever my family manipulated me. This time would be different. I wasn't interested in shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. I wanted facts no one could deny. Before leaving for work, I opened a folder on my laptop titled ***, Family Expenses. ***, it wasn't something I had created for revenge. It was simply where I kept old receipts for tax purposes and budgeting. As I scrolled through the files, I realized just how much money had disappeared over the years. There were bank transfers to Dad when his business struggled, wire payments for Jake's college tuition, receipts for my mother's medical emergency, credit card statements showing vacations, birthday dinners, and holiday shopping that I had quietly covered. The total kept climbing, $10,000, $50,000, $80,000. By lunchtime, the final number appeared on my screen. ***, $214, $3, $187. I stared at it in silence. More than $200,000, enough to buy a beautiful home. Enough to retire early if invested wisely. Enough to completely change someone's life. Instead, it had been spent keeping my family's lifestyle afloat. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I regretted helping them. Because I realized they had never once thanked me. That afternoon I returned to the Grand Oak. The restaurant manager recognized me immediately. "Good afternoon, M.S. Carter. I have a favor to ask." He invited me into his office. I explained everything honestly, from never receiving an invitation to being called only after dinner ended. His expression slowly changed from polite professionalism to genuine disbelief. "I thought you were one of the guests who had stepped outside," he admitted. "I wasn't," he sighed. "I can confirm that your name wasn't listed on the reservation." My heart sank, even though I already suspected the answer. They never intended for me to attend. I'm afraid not. He printed the reservation details. Only my parents, Jake, and the invited relatives appeared on the guest list. There was no Emily Carter anywhere. Then he surprised me. "Our private dining room has security cameras covering the entrance." I looked up. "The footage still exists, yes." He couldn't legally hand me a copy without the proper request, but he invited me to watch the recording in his office. The video began at 6:45 p.m. Guests laughed as they entered. My parents greeted everyone warmly. Then, around 8:30 p.m., a waiter approached their table. Even without sound, I could see him asking a question. Mom smiled confidently. She pointed toward the entrance and laughed. Jake threw his head back, laughing too. Several relatives joined in. The waiter nodded and walked away. The manager paused the video. I remember that conversation. What was said? He hesitated before answering. The waiter asked whether another guest was still coming. My stomach tightened and your mother smiled and said, he looked uncomfortable, "Don't worry, she'll show up after we're done. She always pays." For a few seconds I couldn't speak. Not because I was surprised, because hearing the words from someone outside, my family, made them impossible to excuse. There had been no misunderstanding, no forgotten invitation, no accident. It had all been planned. I thanked the manager for his honesty and left the restaurant carrying copies of the reservation records and itemized invoice. That evening, I sat at my dining room table, surrounded by folders, receipts, and bank statements. For hours, I organized everything by date. Every loan, every unpaid borrowed dollar, every family dinner, every mortgage payment, every tuition transfer, every luxury purchase disguised as an emergency. By midnight, I had assembled a complete financial timeline covering the last 12 years. The next morning, my Aunt Linda called. "Emily, your parents are upset. They think you overreacted about the dinner." I smiled quietly. "Really?" They're planning a big family barbecue this Saturday. Your mom wants everyone there. Perfect. For the first time in years, I wasn't being invited because they loved me. They were inviting me because they assumed everything had gone back to normal. They had no idea I would be bringing something far more valuable than another credit card. I would bring the truth. Every receipt, every bank statement, every broken promise, every lie they had hidden behind the words, "We're family." As I carefully placed the final document into a neatly labeled binder, I couldn't help but smile. My family thought the anniversary dinner had been the perfect scam. They were about to discover it had become the biggest mistake they had ever made, because this time, when everyone gathered around the table, I wouldn't be paying for the meal. I would be presenting the bill they had been avoiding for more than a decade. Saturday afternoon arrived with bright sunshine, and my parents' backyard was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue. My relatives greeted each other as if nothing unusual had happened. To them, the anniversary dinner was already forgotten. To me, it was only the beginning. I walked through the gate carrying a slim black binder instead of the usual bottle of wine or expensive dessert. Jake spotted me first and smirked. "Hey, look who's back," he joked. "Did you bring your credit card this time?" A few cousins laughed. I simply smiled. I brought something much more valuable. Everyone gathered around the patio tables as lunch was served. Once the plates were cleared, my mother stood to thank everyone for coming. "Family is everything," she said proudly. "We're so blessed to have people who always support each other." The irony almost made me laugh. When she finished speaking, I stood up. "If no one minds," I said calmly, "I'd like to add something." My mother frowned. "This isn't the time, Emily. It will only take a few minutes." Without waiting for permission, I placed the black binder on the table and opened it. I've spent the last few days reviewing my finances. Curious faces turned toward me. I wanted to know exactly how much I've contributed to this family over the past 12 years. Jake rolled his eyes. "Seriously?" I ignored him. I paid for Jake's college tuition. I placed the first receipt on the table. I paid Dad's mortgage when his business nearly failed. Another document, I covered Mom's so-called medical emergency. Another receipt, which, by the way, turned out to be a luxury SUV lease. Gasps echoed around the yard. Mom's face immediately turned pale. "Emily, stop this nonsense," I continued. "I paid for family vacations, birthday dinners, Christmas gifts, anniversary celebrations, and countless temporary loans that were never repaid." One by one, I laid out the documents in perfect order. Finally, I held up a single page. "The total amount I've given this family over 12 years is..." I looked around the silent yard. $214,387. And no one spoke, even the children had stopped playing. Jake laughed nervously. "You're actually keeping score." "No," I replied. I finally started keeping records. Then I reached into the binder once more. I also visited the Grand Oak. My mother's expression changed instantly. There was no misunderstanding. I continued. I was never invited to the anniversary dinner. I showed everyone a copy of the reservation list. My name wasn't on it. Whispers spread through the crowd. Then I calmly repeated the restaurant manager's words. When the waiter asked whether another guest was coming, my mother said, "Don't worry. She'll show up after we're done. She always pays." The backyard fell completely silent. My Aunt Linda slowly lowered her head. One cousin quietly muttered, "That's awful." Dad stood up angrily. "You went digging into private matters." "No," I answered. I uncovered the truth. For the first time, no one defended my parents. Instead, relatives began asking uncomfortable questions. "You really invited her after dinner. You expected her to pay nearly $5,000. Why wasn't she included?" My parents had no answers. Their carefully crafted image of loving, generous parents collapsed in front of everyone. I closed the binder. "I'm not here for revenge," I said quietly. "I'm here to set one boundary." I looked directly at my parents. "From today forward, I will never pay another family bill." Jake scoffed. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious. If anyone needs money," I continued, "the answer is no." My mother suddenly reached for my hand. "Emily, we're family." I gently pulled my hand away. Family doesn't invite someone after dinner just to hand them the bill. With that, I walked toward the gate. No one tried to stop me. Over the next several months, life changed in ways I never expected. Without my financial support, Jake was forced to find a full-time job. My parents sold the luxury SUV they insisted they couldn't live without. Lavish family dinners became simple meals at home, and the endless requests for just one more favor suddenly disappeared. Meanwhile, I used the money I once spent rescuing everyone else to invest in myself. I bought the home I had dreamed about for years, traveled to places I had only seen in magazines, and finally started the small consulting business I had postponed for over a decade. Ironically, the peace I found was worth far more than the money I had lost. A year later, on the date of my parents' next anniversary, my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. Asterisk, would you like to join us for dinner? Asterisk, I smiled, typed a short reply, and pressed send. Asterisk, thank you for the invitation. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and don't worry, I trust you'll cover your own bill. Asterisk, I set my phone aside and looked around my own dining table, where close friends laughed, shared stories, and appreciated one another without expecting anything in return. That was my sweetest revenge. Not exposing my family, not making them struggle, but proving that the moment I stopped financing people who only valued my wallet, I finally became rich in the one thing money could never buy: peace.